Making Tax Digital with Sage Intacct. Hello and welcome to the Sage Intacct SIG VAT solution overview of Making Tax Digital. In this video, I will be showing how to ensure correct setup for MTD tax submissions and demonstrating the use of the application's MTD VAT return submission feature. It is very important that the VAT registration number is correctly set for the UK entity for which you'll be making MTD submissions. First, I will navigate to this entity. You can examine the VAT registration records by navigating to the Tax menu, then selecting through to the Tax Registration Records. Select the tax registration record of the UK entity and ensure that the VAT registration number is indeed correct and has the correct format: no leading alphabetic characters, no spaces, and 9 digits for the UK. Edit the field if needed and save the record. During the tax submission workflow, the system checks that the books are closed for the MTD obligation period for which the submission is being made. We will be demonstrating the submission of a tax return for the obligation period that starts on February the 1st, 2019 and ending on April the 30th, 2019. In this case, I will close the books to the end of April 2019 by visiting the General Ledger module from the top level and selecting Close the Books. Then I will select my UK company entity and I will select to close the books to the end of the period of April 2019. Before proceeding, it is necessary that you have taken the required steps to add MTD to your company's account at HMRC and that you are authorized to access services that allow the retrieval and updates of your company's MTD tax information. I am now ready to create an MTD submission. Returning to my UK company entity page, I go to the Tax Returns List view from the Tax menu. Since I have not yet created any MTD tax submissions for my UK company, the list is empty. Initiate a new MTD submission by selecting New Tax Return, which enters an 8-step workflow. Step 1 involves a confirmation of the company's tax registration number. Under MTD, HMRC keeps a record of fulfilled and outstanding tax obligation periods. In Step 2, the system prompts for authentication information to allow the SIG VAT solution to access your HMRC account and retrieve outstanding obligation periods on your behalf. If I click Next, I will enter that step too. Here the system is asking me to confirm if I want to interact with HMRC. I click Yes, and now I'll be prompted to enter my login credentials. Click Continue and enter your credentials. These credentials are likely the same credentials that you have been using at the HMRC Government Gateway. Sign in and click on Grant Authority to authorize the application to access your tax information. Next, select the desired open obligation period start and end date and click Next. The VAT solution then retrieves all the tax details for the entity's transactions and journal entries that need to be considered for calculating the tax return. In this Step 3, you are presented with a list of transactions with tax point falling within the selected obligation period. If there are any prior period transaction changes or late invoices recorded in the system, Step 3 would have also shown them to give the user the opportunity to deal with them in this period's submission. In this demo, however, we do not have any such prior period corrections to make, so we move on to creation and review of the tax return in steps 4 and 5. If you are satisfied with the set of transactions that are included in the submission, click Next to move on to the validation step. During validation, the system performs several consistency checks, including making sure that all transactions have successfully calculated and written tax information to the VAT account register. If any validations fail, the application will display diagnostic error messages related to offending transaction entry lines and display remedial action steps to be tried before attempting the submission again. Successful validation moves the workflow through to the VAT return summary page, on which the system displays the computed 9-box UK return. Here we see the numbered boxes and their labels and the computed amounts on the right-hand side. I can also download a PDF version of the 9-box return by clicking on the report link here. This stage also includes the generation of reconciliation reports, which provides links to retrieve the obligation period's tax reconciliation reports, which will appear in the top left-hand portion of the page once generation completes. These tax return reconciliation reports can be used to reconcile transaction entry line tax details with entries made to the general ledger during the tax reporting period. They also provide the expense or revenue amounts, corresponding tax amounts and tax codes or tax treatments for all input and output transactions in the obligation period. At this point, you can choose to exit the tax return submission workflow to return to Intacct and make any changes, perhaps based on findings during your VAT reconciliation procedures. If you do so, you can re-enter the submission process from the tax return listing page accessible from the tax menu, Tax Returns. Re-entering an open submission puts the user back at the transaction review step 3. In this demo, we are happy with the submission, so we can proceed to make the submission to HMRC. We are now presented with a confirmation message, and once we have agreed to the declaration, the system proceeds to transmit the submission to HMRC and returns a confirmation message. If all is successful, the success message will be displayed. Let's go back to Sage Intacct and to the Tax Submissions list view. Select the record to review the details. These details include the submission status, which we see here marked as fulfilled, the date and time of submission, the reconciliation reports generated for the submission, and by selecting the Transactions tab, you can review the transactions that were included in the submission. And this concludes the SIG VAT Solution MTD overview, including initial setup steps and how to make your first MTD tax submission. Thank you. To learn more about Sage Intacct, please visit www.sage.com/UK/Intacct.